So what I'd like to discuss with you today, why we're here and what's at stake for North Carolina's future. We're here today to talk about the quality of life, safety, and economic growth for our state. Here's what we know. In our 3 million people, we need to create 1 million new jobs as we prepare for that growth. In 2030, we'll be the 7th largest state in America. And right now, we're the 28th largest economy in the world. We're currently the 5th largest manufacturing state in the country, and nearly half of what we make is exported to other states and other countries via our transportation system. So it stands to reason that looking at all this opportunity and growth potential, the business community would invest significant time and effort and resource into developing a long-term plan we call Vision 2030. And actually, when you think about it, it's only 15 years away. This pro-growth strategy focuses on 4 key pillars that we think are important to move our state forward. Education and talent, the need to have a competitive business climate, infrastructure and growth, entrepreneurship and innovation. 4 things that we have to get right in North Carolina to increase capital formation, job creation, and make this the best state for business. So today, we're here to shine a light on one of those pillars, the infrastructure and growth pillar, to ensure we have sufficient investment in things like water, sewer, roads, bridges, and energy and broadband. These all can be catalysts for growth via thoughtful investment and have far-reaching benefit for generations to come. So what's the problem right now? North Carolina, in our opinion, is at a crisis point, and we feel could jeopardize the growth I've just mentioned, and action is needed now around transportation and infrastructure. As I mentioned, our rapidly growing population is the 4th fastest growing in the country, with 12 million people being here by 2030. This combined with aging roads and bridges, nearly 1 in 3 of our bridges are, quote, structurally obsolete. This is the 37th worst statistic of its kind of any state in the country. The cost associated with just replacing those bridges is nearly $5.5 billion in present dollars. This leads to increased congestion. Some of you know that live here, and also in Charlotte, but just wait. By 2030, again, 15 years away, cities like Raleigh, Charlotte, and the Triad are anticipated to double in population. This also heightens concern for public safety. Right now, North Carolina has the 2nd most non-interstate road fatalities in America. Presently, you might be surprised to know North Carolina has no long-term investment strategy to fund nearly $65 billion of projects. There is some good news. Over the last couple of years, we've made some progress. At the legislature, with the governor's leadership and the General Assembly, we've enacted a strategic mobility formula, which is improving transportation by more dollars, more projects to be completed. You might notice over the last couple months the sharp decline in the price of oil. It's been well documented. We see it at the pumps. But because of that, July 1, in this state, North Carolina will face its own fiscal cliff-style problem. It has immediate implications for our state, as the decline in gas tax revenues, which are dedicated to road funding, will be diminished. Over 10 years, this is about a $5 billion problem for North Carolina. Gas tax is about 70% of our current DOT budget. Combined with increased fuel efficiencies, which are mandated by 2018, the increased material and labor cost, and uncertainty, as many of you know out of Washington, no one knows what the future highway transportation fund plan looks like. So all the more reason why we think North Carolina right now needs a long-term funding reform plan, in our opinion, based on 3 key principles. It needs to be diversified, stable, and economically efficient. It needs to address safety and congestion. and it needs to advance and promote economic activity. Our Chamber Foundation commissioned a study by NC State in the fourth quarter of last year. You have an executive summary in your packets today. We wanted to really understand what's the macroeconomic impact of not only what happens when we build more infrastructure, but how does it affect the economy in a positive light. You might be surprised to know for every $1 billion investment that we make in infrastructure, the macroeconomic impact in the whole economy leads to 14,000 new jobs, 10.3 billion in wages, 10.8 billion in increasing state domestic product. It's about a 10-to-1 return on investment. As many of you know that have been around this issue for a while, this is probably the most studied issue in recent North Carolina history. The only thing that's happened since all the studies have been written is the needs have become more urgent. And like most big problems, they don't get better with time. We're here today as a broad-based coalition of associations, chambers of commerce, businesses, and business organizations to suggest that 2015 needs to be a year of action, where North Carolina elected leaders make a decisive long-term commitment to securing our state's future. For the organized business community that we represent, this is a priority as the North Carolina General Assembly long session kicks off today. 2015 needs to be a year of action, as our study highlights, but I think it's important to note that there's a negative consequence of inaction. If we fail to do nothing, if we fail to maintain the status quo, it's actually a decision to put our state in economic decline. Our study points to job loss, it points to decline in gross state product, and it points to decline in economic activity. There's not an acceptable outcome from that decision. So as our campaign kicks off today, we're here to suggest with a group of our colleagues and leaders, North Carolina can't afford to wait. Here today I have three important leaders in North Carolina to discuss this issue from their perspective and their geographies. I'm going to introduce all three and then they'll come up one at a time. First is Kit Kramer. She's president and CEO of the Asheville Area Chamber of Commerce, one of the state's leading local chambers in North Carolina. Charles Edwards is executive director of the North Carolina Center for Logistics, covering the whole state, but focused on the interesting challenges associated with logistics, and again, in a top manufacturing state, how products move from point A to point B. And finally, Jerry Cook, who's a member of our chamber board and vice president of trade relations at Hanesbrands and Winston-Salem, will talk about how he sees this issue as a global company competing around the world for economic activity. So, Kit, welcome.
Good morning. Hope everybody's doing well this morning. I'm going to try and illustrate for you some of the issues around transportation in North Carolina. As I hope you all well know, Asheville is in western North Carolina. Our county is bifurcated by I-40 and I-26. I-26 serves as a spine that connects both western North Carolina to Tennessee and to South Carolina. And yet I-26 comes down to one lane in downtown Asheville. There are daily backups, there are daily wrecks along the corridor that endanger people, they waste time, and they hurt our quality of life. And we've been talking about I-26 literally for 20 years. I'm going to expound on this a little bit, so I'm going to ask you to bear with me and help feel my pain on this particular issue, because it's an example of what's happening all across this state. We have a 10-county labor pool in Asheville. So 40,000 people come into downtown Asheville every day to work. We're a center for jobs in the region. A lot of those people use I-26, and I-26 narrows to a single lane in downtown Asheville. And that impacts business. We have a well-rounded economy in Buncombe County, but tourism is certainly an important slice of that. Last year we had over 9.1 million visitors to Asheville. And on any given day, that's 25,000 people visiting us, in addition to the 40,000 who travel downtown every day. Those visitors resulted in a total of $1.5 billion that have in direct spending that is so important to so many small businesses in our area. And those visitors use roads. Because we've done really good marketing work with the Convention and Visitors Bureau, you probably know more about beer and chocolate and visits to Biltmore and our arts scene than you do about our manufacturing. But we also, that's 11% of our employment in Asheville. And moving those products on a regular basis is a big issue for us. So even though we are a comparatively small community, made up largely of small business, transportation is incredibly important to us, and that infrastructure is important to us. Now, have I mentioned I-26 yet? I-26 will take you from Asheville to the business juggernaut in South Carolina of Greenville-Spartanburg. And along the way, you'll encounter Greer, South Carolina, where the South Carolina General Assembly has funded an inland port. And that's been very strategic on their part, because you've heard about the widening of the Panama Canal, and their infrastructure works that are being done at the Port of Charleston, which will connect to Greer. And specifically, the General Assembly in South Carolina has put an additional $700 million for Port Authority infrastructure improvements, and they have found $1.3 for Port Authority improvements in both Charleston and Greer. They have found a way to fund those infrastructure needs because they're seeing the business opportunity that exists. And we're paying attention because they're right down the road on I-26 from us. If you go north and look at what's happening in Virginia, for example, their new transportation funding package is predicted to provide them with an additional $3.5 billion using a variety of methods for funding. And they have a plan to improve and expand existing roads and rail throughout the state. Those improvements are not lost on site selectors. Site selectors are paying a lot of attention to what's happening in both South Carolina and Virginia. North Carolina has been known as a good road state. I don't know if that's the same, we have that same impression today, but we need to give that impression to site selectors. In the competitive world of economic development, it's critical that we can move products and move people efficiently. And we have to find a sustainable way to pay for it. I've hammered on the I-26 one-lane issue, but it's just one piece of a much larger issue for the entire state. In the east, it's I-95, Highway 70, and Highway 64 that connect their region and allow their commerce to thrive. Our concern about long-term, reliable transportation funding is shared by the members of the North Carolina Chamber Federation, representing local communities from the mountains to the coast. Our business community is united about this need. Since I've done a bit of griping, I also want to make sure that I say thank you for the progress that's been made. Governor McCrory, Secretary Tata, and the legislature's work on the new strategic mobility formula has given us some hope, especially for our little project on I-26. We appreciate that effort. Now we have to find a way to fund the list of needs, the growing list of needs that has been developed. We recognize that that'll be a challenge. We asked our own members at the Asheville Chamber about how they would choose to fund transportation infrastructure improvements, and what we learned is everybody wants the improvements, but nobody can agree on how to pay for it. So the General Assembly has a tough row to hoe in that regard. But we are confident that they can find a solution and look for best practices and get the job done. They're up for the challenge. The work cannot wait. Our economic health and quality of life depend on it. So on behalf of the businesses of Asheville and Buncombe County, as well as those of the Chamber Federation, all across the state. I ask that the General Assembly grapple with this issue and find solutions as soon as possible. Thanks.
Center for Ethics and voice to as out this everybody. And just to give you a sense of how important that is, let me give you some facts and figures. We do a study at the center every year that looks at the number of people who are in logistics and supply chain activities. These are the people that not just drive trucks, but handle the goods inside distribution centers, et cetera, et cetera. Our last estimate, which is based on Department of Commerce statistics as of the first quarter of 2014, last numbers that were available, puts that number at over 270,000 people. They're in agriculture, they're in retail, they're in wholesale, they're in healthcare, they're in every single business sector that you can think of. And if they can't do their jobs, we won't have food on the table, we won't have clothes to wear, we won't have building materials to add to either the house that you're redoing or a new factory that people need in order to produce the goods that have been contracted for. It's critical. And it's not just, and I understand Kit's pain about I-26, of adding new lanes. That is important. But it's also talking about how do we smartly add to our transportation system, which is not just roads and bridges, some of which we've already heard from Lou could fall down. It's also about the rail lines, it's about the seaports, and it's about the airports. And let me give you an example of how, and as a logistician for over 45 years, I've seen this happen. If we match up different types of transportation modes, we can better the economy and we can also do it efficiently. There's more and more trucks on the roads. We see that every day. They're critical to moving the goods that we expect to have, whether it's for Christmas or Thanksgiving or just day to day. But do we have to put all of those trucks on the roads? The answer is no. There's a system, and it's the fastest growing part of the railway system in North America, called intermodal, putting trailers and containers on trains. We have 3 major intermodal yards, as they're called, in the Charlotte area and also in Greensboro. In fact, the Greensboro yard is the fastest growing on the East Coast. I hope that the legislature, as they grapple with all of these problems of we've got a lot of needs and not a lot of money, will start looking at other innovative ways to mesh different types of transportation modes so that we can have the goods that we need, so that people can have the jobs that they need, and so that we can prosper throughout North Carolina. You're going to hear more about how we do all of the exports, and I could go on, but I'll let Jerry address all of those. By taking more trucks off the roads, we will make the roads, not only we don't have to build more, but we'll also make them safer. Because a lot of automobile drivers don't understand the dynamics associated with one of the first states to have its own railroad network. This is the birthplace of logistics education at the community college level. It started here in Eastern North Carolina. We have the governor's vision that Kit's already mentioned. We have the mobility formula that was developed by Secretary Tata and his team at the DOT and promulgated into law by the legislature last session. So we have the foundation. We have a lot of challenges, but at least we have something to work with. And it's my hope and my prayer as a logistician and as a researcher in this field that we can come to grips with and make the decisions and start now and not kick the can down the road so that in 10, 15 years or longer, this will be the place that works. Thank you.
Good morning. Hope everybody's doing well. If you're feeling good today, you know you got your Hanes on. If you don't, I'm sorry. It's always a good day. It keeps the chafing down. So today in North Carolina, we have a lot of opportunities. And one of those I want to think about, and Charles hit one of it, is think about integration. Think about highways, homes. I'm a father, I'm a husband, recent grandfather, work for Hanes. We've been in North Country. 95% of the world's consumers are not in the United States. We are a consumer company reaching the world, and we've got to reach it from North Carolina. Our challenge is a tough challenge that's facing. In Winston-Salem, we have a thing, it's called I-52, I-40, and we have a nickname for that. It's called the I syndrome. Every day I'm watching a wreck, I'm not at the office, so I'm not getting to my future. We want to change the I syndrome to be about I'm pursuing my future, I'm servicing a customer, but we want to move that back. Walt Disney often said, if you don't like your future, change it. That's what the Chamber's doing today. It's changing the future that we see. It's a future of unsafe roads. It's a future of congestion, and it's a future where economic activity is being suppressed and slowly strangled, and it's a future that we refuse to accept as ours. So under Lou's leadership and the business community, we've come together to change that and to drive it. We are leaders, and that's what leaders do. They identify, we all know them, we can recite them, we have books and boxes of them. We don't need to study this anymore. We know what the answer is, and it's time to act. Hanes, we've headquartered in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. We got 57,000 employees in 25 countries around the world, but 80% of the households in the United States have our product in them. That means we've got to reach on a daily basis 85 just to maintain our market status with those customers. Every day that's harder and harder for North Carolina because our roadways are congesting and they're slowly strangling our reach. Where we used to be able to reach from North Carolina well across the country in a distribution network, we're now in a regional mid-Atlantic base and it's shrinking down. It is our drivers that we rely on to be productive. It's our distribution that we need to be able to reach, and those centers are being slowly reduced in their reach. A little over 400 billion socks. As a company, I'm sure we did about 1.2 billion socks. Important to find one that got lost in the dryer, so we've got to get that. We can't travel socks on the highway in a truck in the current structure that's set up. We know that. It's tough. I-52 on any day, it's like a lightning strike. You just look at all the wrecks, all the parked trucks on it. We compete for truckers against Home Depot. We compete against because those competitors are trying to get on that same highway. Water, there's Coke products, Pepsi products, all of that is on that same system trying to get for that same weekend, same end of month sale. And we're seeing a constant reduction of the number of drivers who are willing to we need to change that. Our transportation, infrastructure, and roads are unsafe. They're resulting in a very uncompetitive and unhealthy business climate. Text is too slow, you can FaceTime. We have introduced into our state a slowing of the transportation system. And not only is it slowing, as Lou described, it's traveling on more and more unsafe situations, which is untenable. Google Fiber announced that they're going to be putting in a new internet system, but it's only for part of the state. Imagine the rest of the state being starved of highway capacity. And that's what we're doing region by region. We are not right-sizing our capacity. With the status quo transportation funding, North Carolina will not be able to maintain and improve the safety and efficiency of the state's transportation network. This is a huge red flag to the existing North Carolina businesses, manufacturers, and industry, and it's a deterrent for any potential recruiting that the state has. When you think about incentive, what better incentive than to have a transportation network that can get product to the market anywhere in the world, anywhere in the state, instantaneously? That's not what you're looking at when you come to North Carolina. We're very grateful for the governor's leadership, the Senate leadership, and the House leadership for what they've done already on STI. We're very encouraged by that, but we need to move forward. We're counting on their change and the state's ability to set our future right, and not in the future, but move it to present tense now. This is neither a Republican nor a Democratic issue. This is our issue. This is our community's issue, and this is why the chamber and the business community are standing forward on this. This is about a future for our families, for our employees, our customers, and shareholders. We believe at Haynes that we are here in North Carolina. We meet challenges that are difficult head-on. We are a state with great talent and a great workforce that can always think through the difficult issues. But we are a community that must act, and must act now and decisively. There is no more time. The time is now, and the time is upon us to act quickly and efficiently. Thanks.
Well, thanks very much, Kit and Charles and Jerry. I appreciate their perspective on the issue from their geography and from what they do for a living. I think, as all of our speakers have highlighted, the problem has been studied. The time for action is now. Our 2015 pro-growth agenda is moving forward at speed. As Jerry suggested, it needs to move at the speed of business. And we need to make sure North Carolina is moving at that speed. I think the other thing that's important to note, most states aren't waiting for Washington to take action, and they actually aren't waiting for us either. So as other states take control of their competitive future, we need to be one of the leading states doing the same thing. As Jerry indicated, we believe preparing for the future is not a partisan issue. We're calling on our elected leaders of all parties in all branches to step forward and help us bring forth a plan. We stand ready to help them move these ideas forward. And that's, I think, the benefit of aggregating this group here today. I think, like most of you know, when it comes to the really big issues that affect North Carolina's future over the last decades, education, higher education, community colleges, and now transportation.